It was supposed to be the most important day of my career. I had worked for months preparing for this meeting. A $2.8 billion deal was on the table, and every detail mattered. I had rehearsed my presentation countless times, memorized every figure, and visualized success down to the smallest gesture. I thought I was ready for anything, but I never expected to be stopped over something as small as a tie. I walked into the towering glass building, the city stretching endlessly behind the windows. The lobby smelled like polished marble and expensive perfume. My shoes clicked against the shiny floor, each step echoing in the cavernous space. Inside, everything seemed perfect. The lighting, the furniture, even the subtle hum of air conditioning. I felt a surge of confidence. I had earned this. I deserved this. The boardroom was massive, filled with polished wooden tables, leather chairs, and a view that made the city feel small beneath us. Executives and investors were already seated, some scrolling on tablets, some whispering quietly. And then I saw him, the CEO's son. He sat at the head of the table looking relaxed, almost bored, his expensive watch catching the light. He gave me a slow, calculating look that made me suddenly aware of my every move. "You're not wearing a tie," he said, his voice calm but sharp. I froze. I didn't realize it was required," I stammered. He shook his head. "You're about to sit here in front of me and my father, ready to close a deal worth billions, and you show up like this?" His tone was mocking, but the authority behind it was unmistakable. I tried to explain. "Sir, the numbers are solid. The proposal is ready. This deal—" "Doesn't matter," he interrupted, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "I can't let you sit at the table dressed like that. Rules are rules." A strange silence filled the room. My colleagues shifted uncomfortably. The CEO himself hadn't said a word yet, but the tension in the air was suffocating. My dream, the deal I had worked for my entire career, seemed to slip away in that moment, all because of a piece of cloth around my neck. I wanted to fight back, to push for logic, to prove that my preparation and expertise mattered more than my outfit. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't work. He had the power, and right now his decision was absolute. I had to make a choice, leave quietly or cause a scene that could destroy everything. I took a deep breath. "I understand," I said, trying to sound calm. I began packing my briefcase, each movement deliberate, aware of the eyes on me. His smirk widened slightly, and I felt a mix of humiliation and anger rise inside me. Just as I turned to leave, one of my colleagues whispered, "Don't give up. You've got this." The words were small, but they hit me hard. Could I really walk back in, face him, and reclaim the deal? Or was it gone forever, lost to arrogance and petty rules? My mind raced. I imagined the headlines, the gossip, the conversations about how I let a $2.8 billion deal slip through my fingers over something so trivial. I stepped into the hallway, the doors closing behind me with a heavy thud. The city lights blurred past as I tried to steady my shaking hands. My mind replayed the moment over and over. How could one person sitting at the end of a table wield so much control? How could something so small feel so devastating? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every scenario played in my head like a movie. The media picking it apart, the investors losing faith, the deal dissolving before it could even begin. And yet, beneath the fear and frustration, a spark of determination remained. I knew this wasn't over, not yet, not if I had anything to say about it. The next day, I would have to face the boardroom again. I would have to navigate the arrogance, the politics, and the sheer unpredictability of the CEO's son. The next morning, I returned to the skyscraper, my briefcase heavier with both documents and nerves. I had barely slept, replaying the humiliation from yesterday over and over in my mind. Every step toward the building felt like walking into a storm I couldn't escape. My tie was perfectly knotted this time, my suit impeccable, my shoes polished until they reflected the fluorescent lights above. I told myself it wouldn't matter. Business was business. But deep down, I knew that one glance from the CEO's son yesterday had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. As I entered the boardroom, the air felt different. It was quiet, almost too quiet, like the calm before a hurricane. The CEO's son was there, as expected, sitting at the head of the table, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me with a smirk that hadn't left his face since yesterday. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze, the investors, my team, even the CEO himself, who was silently observing from the end of the table. I took a deep breath and began setting up my presentation. The projector hummed to life, casting the first slides onto the wall. Charts, graphs, projections, it all looked perfect. Every number, every forecast was sharp, undeniable. But the moment I tried to speak, the son leaned forward, cutting me off. "Before we begin," he said, his tone sharper than before, "let's make one thing clear. I still don't understand why you weren't wearing a tie yesterday. It's a small detail, but it matters. A lot." I froze for a split second, trying to measure my response. I wanted to tell him to focus on the deal, on the billions of dollars at stake. But every instinct screamed that it would only escalate things. So instead, I nodded politely. "Understood," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart raced. The CEO leaned back in his chair, watching silently. There was a coldness in his eyes, a weight of judgment that made me feel like a child caught in a lecture. My mind screamed. Was this really happening? Could a simple tie, a piece of clothing, really influence billions of dollars? Or was this some twisted test of character I had unknowingly failed? I began my presentation, my voice slightly shaking at first, then gaining strength with every slide. I explained the strategy, outlined the potential profits, highlighted the partnerships, and projected growth. I could see the investors leaning in, nodding, taking notes. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. Until the CEO's son decided to speak again. "Interesting," he said, cutting through the momentum. "But what about the risks? Have you considered the long-term liability, or is that too complicated?" His tone was mocking, but delivered as if he were casually concerned. It was designed to undermine, to make me question myself in front of everyone. I felt a surge of frustration, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Yes," I replied evenly. "We've accounted for every potential risk. Contingency plans are in place and all partners are aligned for mitigation strategies. This deal has been prepared with maximum diligence." A murmur ran through the room. Some of the investors nodded, impressed by my composure. Others looked uncertain, glancing between me and the CEO's son as if trying to decode a secret battle happening in plain sight. I realized then that this wasn't just a business negotiation. It was a battlefield of ego and power. The tension was unbearable. Every word, every gesture mattered. I noticed my team exchanging worried looks. My assistant leaned over quietly and whispered, "Just keep going. Don't let him control this." I nodded subtly. I had to focus, to stay in control of what I could, because everything else was chaos. Minutes stretched like hours. I could feel my hands sweating inside my gloves, my throat dry, my mind a whirlwind of strategy and survival. And then it happened. The son leaned back and laughed, low and sarcastic. "You think a tie fixes everything?" he said, almost as if mocking my efforts. "Do you really believe showing up dressed correctly makes you credible?" The words cut deeper than any insult I had faced in my career. The room went silent, every eye fixed on me. I felt my stomach tighten. For a moment I questioned everything, my preparation, my abilities, even my choices. But I knew I couldn't let him win. Not now, not when I was so close. I straightened, my voice calm but firm. "This isn't about appearances," I said. "This deal is about facts, strategy, and value. The numbers speak for themselves, and the projections show clear growth. The tie doesn't change any of that. For a moment, it seemed like my words landed. The investors nodded again, some scribbling notes, some exchanging impressed glances. But the CEO's son didn't move. He just smiled faintly, a smile that was more a challenge than approval. "You're persistent," he said finally. "I'll give you that. But persistence alone won't earn respect here." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the room pressing down. The next day felt heavier than the first. Word had already begun to spread about the previous meeting, the tie incident, the confrontation, the way the CEO's son had humiliated me in front of the board. Whispers in the office, hushed calls from colleagues, even subtle glances from people I didn't know. It all reminded me that this wasn't just about the deal anymore. It had become a story, a test, a spectacle, and I couldn't let it consume me. Not yet. As I walked back into the skyscraper, I could feel eyes following me. Some were curious, some amused, some critical. Every step felt like walking onto a stage, and I was the reluctant actor in a drama I hadn't asked to star in. My tie was straight, my suit sharp, but I felt the invisible weight of judgment pressing down. This wasn't just a negotiation anymore, it was a war of wills, and the CEO's son was determined to win. The boardroom door opened and I stepped inside. The son was already there, lounging in the same chair, his smirk sharper, more confident, like he knew he had the power to make or break me. The CEO sat at the end of the table, silent, observing, waiting. My team fidgeted quietly, aware that every glance, every movement, every word mattered. "You're back," he said casually, almost mocking. "Did you bring the tie this time, or is it just for show?" I forced a calm smile. "It's here," I said, subtly adjusting it. "And I'm ready to move forward." He leaned back, studying me like a predator sizing up prey. "Ready, huh? We'll see about that." The tension in the room was suffocating. Every eye was on me. Every breath I took felt loud. And then the cameras arrived. Investors, journalists, even a few social media personalities invited by the company to cover the big deal. Suddenly, this private boardroom drama had turned into a public spectacle. I realized that every misstep, every hesitation, could go viral. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. I started my presentation again, walking through slides, projections, risks, and opportunities. I felt the sweat on my palms, the tension in my shoulders, but I pushed through, focusing on the facts, the numbers, the strategy. For a moment, it felt like I had control, until the son spoke again. "Interesting," he said, voice smooth but cutting. "But don't you think your numbers are a little, optimistic? The market isn't always that forgiving. Maybe your projections need a little reality check." I paused, feeling the sting of his words. It wasn't just skepticism. It was an attempt to undermine me in front of everyone. My voice steady, I replied, "We've analyzed multiple scenarios. The projections are based on data, market trends, and proven strategies. This isn't optimism. It's evidence." He laughed, a low, mocking sound that made my blood boil. "Evidence? You think a slide deck can outshine real experience? Let's see if your charm can win the investors here." A few investors exchanged glances, some visibly amused by the tension, others unsure how to react. The CEO still said nothing, observing silently, letting the game play out. I realized that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, ego, and control. Minutes stretched into hours. Every question, every interruption, every smirk was a test. The son seemed to relish it, enjoying the disruption, the small victories that slowly chipped away at my confidence. My colleagues whispered advice, tried to help me navigate the minefield, but I had to fight this battle myself. I had to prove that my skill, knowledge, and determination mattered more than appearances or arrogance. Then came the turning point. One of the investors leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Let's focus on the numbers. The strategy is sound, the growth potential is clear, and the risk mitigation is well thought out. If appearances or theatrics are the only obstacle, I think we can overlook them." The room shifted. The son's smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a flash of frustration. He tried to regain control, interjecting with more sarcastic remarks. But the momentum was changing. My confidence grew as I reinforced each point, countered each challenge with facts, and reminded the room why this deal mattered. By the end of the meeting, the air had shifted. The son's challenges had tested me, humiliated me, and pushed me to my limits. But I had survived. I had stood firm, answered every question, and proved that preparation and persistence mattered more than petty judgments. The investors were impressed, some nodding, some shaking my hand, and I could feel the tide turning in my favor. But the real challenge wasn't over. As I packed my materials, I felt the CEO's gaze. He finally spoke, his tone neutral but commanding. "You handled yourself well under pressure. Not everyone would have survived this room." The son, however, was silent. His eyes were sharp, calculating, as if planning his next move. I knew that winning the deal wasn't just about this meeting. It was about Nin. The morning after the final boardroom showdown, the world felt different. My phone buzzed constantly, emails, messages, notifications piling up like a storm. Social media had already exploded. Clips of the confrontation, screenshots of the conversation about the tie, and comments about the CEO's son were circulating everywhere. Headlines ranged from "Tie Scandal Rocks $2.8 billion Deal" to "CEO's Son Humiliates Executive in Boardroom Drama." My private humiliation had become a public spectacle overnight. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Some comments were supportive, praising my courage under pressure. Others were cruel, mocking the tie, questioning my professionalism, calling me arrogant or unprepared. I realized that surviving the boardroom was only half the battle. The rest was surviving the court of public opinion. When I arrived at the office, whispers followed me down the hallway. Colleagues tried to hide smiles, others gave awkward nods. Investors called, some curious, some cautious, asking if the deal was still on. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that facts, not opinions, mattered. But it was hard. The humiliation had gone viral, and the emotional toll was real. The CEO finally called me into his office. His expression was neutral, unreadable. "You handled yourself," he said, "better than I expected." I nodded, still catching my breath. "Thank you, sir. I tried to focus on the work, the numbers, the strategy." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "It wasn't easy. The boardroom is about more than numbers. It's about character, composure, and handling the unexpected. You passed that test. The deal will proceed." Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with exhaustion and disbelief. I had survived the humiliation. I had saved the deal, and yet the world outside the glass walls had already created its own narrative. The son, however, remained a challenge. He never apologized, never acknowledged the ordeal. His smirk remained, his eyes calculating as if every move was part of some elaborate game. But I realized something crucial. He could challenge me, but he could not define me. I had the power to choose my response, to control what mattered: my work, my reputation, and my integrity. By the afternoon, the story had exploded. News outlets picked up the clips, financial blogs analyzed every moment, and social media users debated the tie fiasco like it was a historic event. "Executive humiliated by CEO's son over tie," one headline screamed. $2.8 billion deal almost destroyed by boardroom arrogance, another blared. My phone never stopped ringing. Notifications pinged constantly as people weighed in, some supporting me, others mocking the situation. I felt a strange mix of emotions: Anger, pride, disbelief, and exhaustion all tangled together. It was surreal. A day that had begun with humiliation ended with validation, but in a way I hadn't expected. The boardroom victory had become public, turning personal conflict into a global conversation. That evening, I sat alone, scrolling through the flood of reactions. Supporters praised my courage, saying I had stood up to arrogance. Critics ridiculed the tie, questioning my professionalism. Investors weighed the implications for the deal. And somewhere in the chaos, I realized a lesson that would stay with me forever. Appearances can be deceiving, authority can be arbitrary, and resilience, real resilience, is what earns respect. The sun would continue to wield influence, the headlines would keep spinning, and the story would remain a cautionary tale for years to come. But I had survived. I had learned that power can test you in unexpected ways, that humiliation can turn into opportunity, and that staying composed under pressure is a victory in itself. And now, I turn to you, the viewers, the audience who witnessed this journey unfold. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Could you have handled the pressure, the humiliation, the public scrutiny? I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, and your take on this dramatic story. Share it in the comments below. Don't hold back. If this story shocked you, inspired you, or kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe to Channel Name. Hit the like button to show support and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that dives deep into high-stakes drama, career-defining moments, and the unexpected twists that life throws at us. This isn't just a story about a tie, a CEO's son, or a $2.8 billion deal. It's about resilience, courage, and refusing to let someone else define your worth. And remember, sometimes the most absurd obstacles reveal your true strength. The aftermath is still unfolding, the conversation continues, and the lesson remains. Power can be petty, challenges can be public, but your response, your courage, your preparation, your integrity, makes all the difference. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? How would you face someone trying to humiliate